Join us now with his reaction to the Fed's decision and Chairman Powell's comments. National Economic Council Director Kevin Hassett. You're okay, right? You were enjoying things. You're getting your thoughts together and everything. Hopefully, the guy with the lawnmower is not coming out today, Kevin.
That was funny last week. Yeah,
unbelievable. 25 basis points. It's a start. How do you view that?
You know, my old friend Alan Greenspan used to say that monetary policy, steering it is kind of like steering the Queen Mary. And I don't know if the Queen Mary exists still, but the bottom line is that moving kind of slow and steady and heading towards a target and watching the data come in, that's what prudent policy is. And so I know that my colleague Stephen wanted to go to 50, but I think 25 is a pretty broad consensus. And I think that's a good first step in the right direction of much lower rates.
Kevin, do you want the job still? I mean, would you temper anything you're saying right now based on the possibility of you being the next Fed chair? Just
the only thing I could promise you, Joe, is that I do my job here as Director of National Economic Council as best as I can every day. And when you and I are interviewed, I'm not thinking ahead to some future job or anything. I'm thinking about, as Director of the National Economic Council, what can I do to communicate to the American people the best about what we're working on today?
You acknowledge there's some cross currents, or at least some puzzling things in trying to gauge the current economy or the environment that we're in right now. I asked Leisman, tongue in cheek, whether Jay Powell said, "Oh, by the way, we've moved the inflation target to 3%," because that's where we are. And if you're cutting, and we're 2.9, whatever, if you're cutting it, I don't see. I know labor suddenly in that picture has gotten a little bit cloudy, but we are not at. We're 50% above the 2% target for inflation.
Right. Well, it depends on whether you look at the 2 or 3 month or 7 month trends, right? So we've gone from about 3.9 to about 2.5 over 7 month averages, and we've done worse than that over the last 3 months. At the same time, when we're looking at the economic data, really it's through the roof. We've had 3.3% growth for the second quarter. GDP now is north of 3. And the way to think about the upside risks, Joe, is that we just got these retail sales data. Year over year, nominal retail sales in the control group, which is what matters for GDP, was up 6%. So depending on what you think inflation is, that means that you're really looking at close to 4% GDP growth. And so, yeah, the cross current would be that it looks like we're having a boom like we did in the first term, where there's really, really high economic growth and not out of control inflation. And the way that happens, in my mind, is that when the growth comes from supply side factors, if there's a big increase in supply, then you can have more growth without inflation. And it looks like that's beginning to happen now.
The Fed raised the growth forecast and the inflation forecast. If there was a Taylor rule or something, it just seems like there are no rules. It's almost like flying by the seat of the pants all the time, or intuition or something. I mean, it's not rules based, is it?
Well, the bottom line is that it could be rules based if your rules make sense, right? But for example, the Phillips curve rule doesn't really work for monetary policy because you could have high or low unemployment for supply side reasons or demand side reasons. And if you've got, low unemployment for demand side reasons, you're going to have inflation. If you have low unemployment for supply side reasons, then you won't. And so I think it's much more prudent for the Fed to be looking at all the models, to have a diversity of opinions, and to decide what are we going to do in this economy that really looks to be taken off with inflation that's, decelerating but higher than target. And I think that, they split the baby in this decision, and I think that's probably a pretty prudent call.
Kevin, you mentioned your colleague Stephen Myron is presumed to have wanted a 50 basis point cut. Yesterday, it's also assumed that he's the low dot out there, wanting more than 1 percentage point of further cuts this year, getting it below 3% by December. Is that something you'd agree with, given the growth outlook that you just laid out?
Right. I've seen Stephen's analysis. I think that it's heartfelt. It's not dependent on, any partisan influence from the White House. He's going to go out there and he's going to do his job well. He's going to be an independent Fed governor. I think that exactly what the correct interest rate is and how the Fed should react is something that's a work in progress. The Fed needs to watch the data come in. Are the inflation numbers that are not as low as we would like going to get worse? Is the growth number going to get better but be all supply side? And so I think that having data-dependent decisions is the history of the Fed when it's at its best, and it looks like that's what they did today. And I think that's what anyone who's trying to do the job well should be doing.
And there's a piece in the journal, divergent economy gets even more divided, and these guys, it's not an op-ed piece, it's a headline. The divided fortunes of the rich and the poor in the U.S. might sound like an old story, but in recent years, it started widening again after some low-income growth. I think in the last president, in the president's last administration, his first term. But it's stalling. I mean, it's a real concern, is it not? The low-end consumer right now, there seems to be, like only the very wealthy are flush, or the somewhat wealthy.
Yeah.
But what can we do? What supply side? We grow the pie, but we can't guarantee that it's going to be reach everyone.
Right. Well, don't forget, Joe, that when you and I were talking about this last time when I was in front of the White House, that we were talking about how income growth was the highest for people at the bottom. We had this thing called the Gini coefficient, which is a measure of income inequality, and income inequality was declining sharply under President Trump. And the reason was that because he was creating all these jobs, he was getting everybody to invest so much in new factories, then he was bidding up the demand for labor. And, I don't know about you, but like I don't go to work every day like holding a machine tool. And when there's a big capital investment boom, then it's the guys who have the tools who see the wage increases the most. And so actually, literally, the bottom 10% had the highest growth. And that's what we expect is going to happen again. And a metric of that really is that we've got this nominal 6% year-over-year retail sales growth over the last 12 months. And, consumption is not nearly as just mal-distributed, if you like, as income. And so the fact that consumption is booming is a sign that people in the bottom half of the income distribution are super optimistic about the effect of our policies.
Hey, Kevin, as a classic economist, do you raise an eyebrow with any of what a lot of critics are calling industrial policy that the administration has embarked on? And in reference to that, do you know whether the president or the government was involved in urging NVIDIA to take a stake in what we now own 10% of as taxpayers, Intel?
I think that each case is different. That the rare earths, the critical minerals issue that we had earlier was, potentially going to be a real bottleneck for the economy. And I think that we appropriately took very strong action to make sure that we could still have this 3% growth that you're seeing. And so you can sort of say, oh, geez, isn't the government supposed to just leave free enterprise alone? And so we had to step in and act. And the only place to do that in real fast time is with government action. And Intel, we had a huge amount of money that was committed to Intel, and Intel wasn't really meeting the marks of their targets for what they needed to do to get the money. And it was decided by the president and Howard Lutnick, Secretary Lutnick, that, well, if we're going to give them that money, then maybe we should get an equity stake. The equity stake, it's not socialism. They don't have voting rights. It's just a place where instead of just throwing money away into a business that may or may not succeed, the U.S. government is helping the business succeed and then making it so that the taxpayer benefits if they're successful at that. But I am not aware of anyone from the government negotiating with NVIDIA on the Intel.
Okay. Well, speaking of NVIDIA, I mean, it doesn't seem normal to, I don't know, it's a shakedown, but yeah, you can sell your chips to China. We just want 15%. That doesn't seem, how can you justify that in terms of if you're a classical economist?
Well, again, the money was going to Intel because the Biden administration committed to give them the money.
No. I'm talking about NVIDIA. I'm talking about 15% of the revenues for some of the chips going to China that the government is going to get from NVIDIA. And I'm not talking about Intel now.
Right. Yeah, that's right.
Well, how does getting 15%? How does getting 15% solve that? If it is security, that doesn't seem to have anything. One doesn't seem to have anything to do with the other.
Oh, it has a lot to do with it, because what it means is first that it raises the price for China, so it makes them have to sort of compensate us if they're getting our country, if they're getting the NVIDIA chips, and these are just the high-end chips, of course, and then we have the money which we could use to pursue countermeasures if necessary.
Okay. Do you have an idea when we'll hear about Jay Powell's successor? Kevin, do you know? Is that Scott Bessent? You have no idea?
I really, honestly, am just trying to do my job every day, and my job is filled morning to night with meetings on all sorts of things. I'd say the thing we're focused on this week is America's farmers. There's a lot of stress for American farms right now. The row crop guys are seeing really, really low prices. We're concerned, especially in California, that we're starting to see bankruptcies and defaults, and so there's enough to do in the White House every day without worrying about the future.
I'm thinking like Home Alone. You're not over there. I mean, you feeling like Macaulay Culkin? I mean, that's a...
Oh, there's a bunch of us here. There's a bunch of us here. Somebody's got to keep the lights on.
Somebody's got to keep the lights on.
Yeah.
All right. Very good. Kevin Hassett, thanks.
Good to see you, Joe.